A Wandering Soul. By MC Prologue, Grand Rapids, Michigan. In a small factory, there's a group of more than 20 people standing in a loose circle. A man wearing jeans and a button-up speaks.
Okay, guys, unfortunately for the next month or two, we will have to cut hours to save money for the company. I'm not happy to be making this decision, but the alternative is to lay off a quarter of our employees. We will start next week, Monday through Thursday, 8-hour days, and will no longer work on Friday. If anybody has any questions for me, please ask.
Now an older gentleman raises his hand up and says,
Well, if we have any vacation time, can we use that to cover the loss for hours?
Good question, replies the other man.
Yes, you're more than welcome to use your PTO to cover the lost hours.
The group nods and disperses back to their respective workstations, while the boss remains to speak with a few other people one-on-one. Moving through the building, we see a man in his mid-20s. He is roughly 5'6". Short brown hair with a stocky build and a small belly, rubbing up against his paint-covered shirt. A couple piercings on his left ear with green eyes. While his facial features could be considered barely above average, with a square jaw, full cheeks, and smooth skin. His name is Harith. Harith shakes his head, with one hand on his head and the other inside his jeans pocket. How am I supposed to pay my bills? Rent's coming up. Electric? Gas? How do they expect us to survive on 30 hours? Well, 32. This isn't fair. He makes his way back to his workstation, taking a seat in front of the work computer, with an empty stare on his face, contemplating everything he is going to have to cut back on in order to pay his bills. Standing up, he walks into a small cubby overlooking his work, putting a hand on his forehead, while the stress starts seeping deeper into his mind. I'm so sick of this shit. There's always something going wrong. Why can't life be easier? Why do I have to be a slave to all these corporations trying to just make money? All I want to do is survive, and to do that I have to work so hard every day to make ends meet. Now all of a sudden the company's cutting hours after having us work 10+ hours a day, 5 days a week. This sucks. Maybe it's time to look for a new job. But maybe not. What about my coworkers? What about the time I put into this place? Can I really just let it all go like that? Off in another place, deep inside a cave, the sound of battle can be heard. A man wearing well-crafted, studded leather armor, with sections along the forearms and shins covered with equally crafted metal guards, yells out,
"Merlin, you traitorous scum! I will take your head! How dare you think that you could get away with performing that ritual?"
Merlin replies,
Edward, you know as well as I do that if I don't do something, the world will come to an end. Look around you. The wars, monsters, hell, even the demon lord has started to make moves against the nations. What else am I supposed to do?
"No, I refuse,"
Edward yells back at him.
"This is not a decision for you to make, and for that you will be put down, Merlin. The church has already declared you a heretic. The king calls you a traitor. All of these decrees mean your death. Merlin, you are a fool. You are a powerful wizard. With you on the battlefield, we could have made a difference. But instead, here you are, going against king, country, and even the church for your own selfish desires."
The sound of clashing steel can be heard vibrating off of the stone walls. Grunts, yelling, and even the sound of lightning reverberates throughout the caverns. Merlin yells out while flicking his wrists into the complex motions of spellcasting, his wand in hand dancing through the air.
Chain lightning.
As a discharge echoes, a few men cry out loudly as thuds can be heard, bodies hitting the hard ground. Edward calls out,
"Damn it, Merlin! Those were good men. You go as far to become a murderer for this,"
as he swings his longsword. Merlin cries out in pain as the sword slashes across his chest. Lunging forward, Merlin's hand just barely touches Edward's shoulder as he chants,
Bestow curse.
Edward immediately shoves Merlin away from him with a shoulder check. Merlin jumping back a few feet with the borrowed momentum, his eyes growing wide as he sees a blue enchantment around Edward's visible flesh dimly flicker out.
It looks like you came prepared.
"I'm not foolish enough to come after you without a few safety precautions first,"
retorts Edward as he lunges forward, slashing into Merlin's shoulder. Falling on his knees to the ground, Merlin grabs at the open wound. Edward, approaching him, swinging his sword off to the side, removing the blood from the blade.
Merlin, I told you. You will die here. There is nothing that can be done. You have chosen your fate. You may be the former Archmage of the kingdom.
Merlin coughs, a smile on his face, as he nods his head, accepting defeat.
You know, Edward, back when we were younger, I always thought things would have been different. Do you remember that fight we got into over that tavern girl?
Edward frowning while glancing down at his former friend.
Yeah, I remember you telling her that I slept with every woman in that tavern, just so you could try and win her over. But enough of that, Merlin. It's time to end this. I'm sorry, old friend.
Merlin looks up at Edward with a smile on his face.
You're right. It is time to end this.
Suddenly, before Edward could realize what was happening, Merlin slammed his hands together, yelling,
Thunderclap.
as a force of energy with an electric shock blasts into Edward at point-blank range, sending him 20 feet into the side of the cave with a nasty crunching sound. Edward letting out a pained yelp as his body slumps to the floor, his neck broken from a protruding rock slamming into the back of it. Merlin looks at Edward's lifeless body as he wipes a tear from his cheek.
I'm so sorry, Edward. Please forgive me.
Holding his shoulder from the injury sustained during the fight, he grits his teeth and retreats deeper into the cave. Slowly limping his way into a large open chamber deeper inside the cave, Merlin kneels down in front of a massive ritual circle drawn into the floor. Picking up a piece of chalk, his hands quickly continue their tedious work.
Damn, Edward. Why did you have to find me? Things could have worked out so much differently.
Wincing in pain,
Damn it. I'll give him one thing. He was one hell of a swordsman.
taking a moment, he looks at his wounds.
They're deep, and I can't get the bleeding to stop. I knew I should have taken the time to learn some healing incantations, but no. I had to be stubborn and just study the arcane.
Standing up from the circle he's been drawing for far too long, he slowly limps to a rickety wooden table along the far wall. He starts rummaging through a pack.
Come on, where is it? I know it's here.
Merlin quickly grabs the pack, flipping it upside down, dumping out the contents haphazardly onto the table. The sound of glass can be heard bouncing onto the table. Sighing in relief, Merlin grabs the small glass vial containing a red liquid. He grabs it and lifts the container to his mouth, using his teeth to remove the cork. Quickly downing its contents, looking over to his shoulder, the wound is already starting to mend itself back together. Shaking his head in disappointment,
Damn. I knew these wounds were too deep, and now I've wasted the only healing potion I could get my hands on. I just hope that this minor mishap... Oh well.
standing straight, or as straight as a wounded man, Merlin slowly makes his way back over to the ritual site. Painfully kneeling back down onto the ground, he picks up the chalk, determination glinting in his eyes.
It's a race against time. I can't let Edward's sacrifice go in vain by dying before I can finish this damn thing.
Harith slowly cleans the machines that he's been working with all day, his motivation gone, his body tired. His coworker tells him to have a nice day as they leave to go home. Harith nods and says you as well. Waiting a few moments until they leave, he looks at his feet, clenches his fists and wonders to himself, how come when everybody else needs a little bit of help to get out on time? I'm always right there, but for some reason when it's my turn, everybody says, have a nice day. Biting his lip, he continues to clean. An hour or so goes by. Leaving the building, he opens the door and takes in a deep breath. It's much more refreshing than breathing in that moldy factory air. He puts a smile on his face because, after all, if you let the small things like missing hours and selfish coworkers stress you out all the time, that's how you die young. Stress is a killer, after all. Harith pulls his keys out of his pocket and starts to twirl them around his finger as he walks across the parking lot to his old Trailblazer. Thinking to himself, God, it's such an ugly car, but she is reliable. Old Bessie's never broken down on me once, battery's gone bad. That was inconvenient, but all in all. You're a good car, giving the vehicle a small pat on the bumper as he walks past to the driver's side. Unlocking the door, climbing inside and putting the key in the ignition and immediately rolling down the window. Holy cow, it's hot. Well, I suppose let's get on home. Got some aliens to slay in this new video game I started playing. And with that, Harith leaves the parking lot. Luckily, not living far from work, the trip is short, merging onto the highway getting up to speed, which for the city limit is roughly 65 miles per hour. Give or take 5, there's a fairly sharp turn up ahead taking one road and merging into another. Now within a quarter mile of this turn, there are road indicators that say you should slow your speed to 35 miles per hour to safely take the turn. Normally, this is exactly what Harith would do, but as he slowly presses down on the brake, something isn't right. The pedal completely pressed to the floor. Glancing down to the floor, the pedal hasn't even come back up yet. Shit. Did the tension wire break? It was perfectly fine. What happened? No warning? Nothing? Just broken? Bringing his attention back to the road and quickly approaching the bend. Oh no, this is bad. I knew whenever I come up off of the first merge ramp I was going a little fast. Sure. Blowing off a little bit of frustration. It's the highway after all. Don't want to cause an accident going too slow and all, but what do? Using the toes of his shoe, Harith tries to pick the pedal up off the floor. Maybe if I pick it up, it'll go back to normal. As expected, it simply flopped back to the floor the moment his shoe left the pedal. Okay, this is bad. At the same moment, a bright light starts to shine from behind him. He can see it in his rearview mirror. Damn, that's bright. Like blindingly bright. There must be a semi-truck right on my ass. Flipping the small knob on the rearview mirror to try and get the lights to dim. It doesn't seem to have any effect. Crap. How close is this guy? Checking his side mirrors, there's nobody there. There's no other vehicle behind me. What the hell? Where's that light coming from? All of this happening over the span of a few seconds. Think. Maybe if I turn my wheel side to side, it'll help me slow down. You know, momentum and all, not being that great when there's not a straight line to follow. My heart is pounding. I mean, honestly, is this how I'm going to die? Flying off the side of the highway, slamming into a building somewhere? Honestly, I think I'm okay with this. I mean, work cut hours, I have no friends, no one to go home to. I'm so tired of fighting. I'm so tired of struggling. I wonder if I close my eyes, it'll be over in a moment, or will I suffer some more? Looking at the speedometer, Harith realizes that even jerking the wheel off to the sides, he's still going roughly 70 miles an hour. Well, screw it. Hopefully I don't kill anybody with my reckless decision. But if I'm going to die, or at least get gravely wounded, then I'm going to do it good. With his mindset, Harith nervously puts his foot on the accelerator. Am I really going to do this? Pressing down on the pedal, the engine starting to roar. Ha ha ha, look at you, old girl. Sounds like you still have a bit of life left in you. I guess we'll go together then. His foot presses the pedal to the floor, quickly approaching the bend. Looking in the rearview mirror one more time. That light's still bothering my eyes. A quick glance to the side mirrors, and again, nothing. I wonder if maybe there's a helicopter above me and they can see what's going on. Maybe they noticed I was fishtailing, and now they're following me to see what happens. News channel, maybe. Ha! No, that's dumb. Being jolted out of his thoughts, he hears a loud thud. He feels a massive pressure in his chest as the car smashes into the embankment, those concrete guards that they have on the side of the highway. I can feel myself being forced back into my seat. It hurts. A lot. It hurts. Hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they are white. My heartbeat is throbbing. I can feel it in my neck. I can see the ground. The car finally starting to flip over. It's a little slow and anticlimactic. Harith's mind starts to wonder. It's getting closer. It almost feels like time is slowing down. Is this the point where my life is supposed to flash before my eyes? Closing my eyes, but no matter how tightly I squeeze, that light is still there. One more time, he thinks to himself. I'm going to look one more time. Let's be honest, if it's a helicopter, from this angle I should be able to see it, right? Quickly opening my eyes and looking into the rearview mirror, seeing nothing but empty sky behind me. No helicopter, no other vehicle, nothing. But the light keeps getting brighter, strangely enough though. It's kind of comforting and warm. Huh? He softly chuckles to himself. Maybe old girl is on fire, hitting that embankment so hard might have done something. Closing his eyes again, preparing for the inevitable impact of the car and the ground. Taking one final deep breath, expecting to smell burning fuel or chill air conditioning, his lungs instead refused to inflate. Chapter 1. What? Why can't I breathe? Panic starting to set in. I also feel like I'm not falling. Confused, Harith slowly begins to open his eyes, nervous to watch his own death. But as his eyes open, he is greeted with what can only be an endless expanse of blackness. Similar to obsidian, as his eyes shoot open with shock, quickly glancing around, he starts to notice small, round shapes zooming past him. These objects almost remind Harith of large marbles that could more or less fit in the palm of his hand. But it almost looked like the inside of these flying marbles are moving. Some almost look like there is a raging fire inside them. Others have twisting black shades. As the round objects, now dubbed flying marbles, fly past him, they have a small trail of light behind them, almost like a comet in outer space, flying at great speeds. What were those called again? Harith thinks to himself. Dust tails. But why do I seem to be moving so much slower than them, glancing behind my back, not seeing any sort of trail? Continuing to glance around, Harith also notices a strange anomaly around him. It almost seems like I'm in some kind of tube, like a vacuum or something. When I look ahead of myself, I can almost see what looks like the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. But looking behind myself, it almost looks like the tube collapses on itself. So did I actually hit the ground? Am I really dead? And this is just my interpretation of crossing to the other side. Glancing forward again at the light at the end of the tunnel, I start to wonder what's going to happen to me when I finally reach what can only be my final destination. Harith chuckles to himself. It's never a bad time for a stupid joke. Harith suddenly feels anxious, the hairs all over his body standing on end. Goosebumps covering everything. It's hard to breathe again. What the hell is going on now? Trembling, Harith realizes that he has completely stopped moving. Wait. Everything stopped moving, but the marbles still have their tails. Did time just stop? Quickly looking around, the ever-growing feeling of dread taking over his mind, my vision is starting to get blurry. Why? In Harith's panicked state, he spots what he can only describe as a moon, right behind him, eyes wide. That wasn't there a moment ago, I'm sure of it. I've been looking all around. The moon-sized object in front of him is covered in craters like Earth's moon. But the color is wrong. It's almost a bronze color, but darker, like the blackness all around me has tainted it. What is that? Harith mumbles to himself. As answering his question, the moon or abomination opens a massive eye in the center of it. The part that should be white is black, with what looks like small orbs flying through it. The pupil, on the other hand, looks like the blazing furnace of hell itself. Oh God, Harith yelps in reflex, the pupil never taking its gaze off of him. All of a sudden, a mind-shattering pain fills Harith's mind as a primordial voice echoes through his head.
There are no gods here, child, only the astral void and beings such as myself.
Harith's teeth grinding together, unable to move a single muscle. The voice continues to reverberate through his head.
This is interesting. You don't seem to know how you've gotten here.
The massive eye, slightly shifting along the gate, opened around the small life form.
I see now.
The large eye once again landing on Harith's slowly crippling form.
It seems your puny existence cannot take the strain of being stuck inside the summoning rift, let alone be in my presence.
The echoing inside Harith's mind continuing, his vision starting to flash in and out, turning red, the faint feeling of something wet running down his cheeks and nose.
Child of chaos.
The voice speaks once again as Harith's vision slowly turns black. Fear and panic, the only things able to be clung to for comfort.
I will grant to you a gift in exchange for...
The words in Harith's mind finally fading away. A gift, huh? Is the last thing Harith thinks to himself before fully embracing the all-encompassing darkness. My head hurts. I can't feel my body. My memories are foggy. There was a car accident. I was falling. Then nothing. What happened to me? Where am I? The feeling slowly starting to make its way back to Harith's arms and legs and finally fingers and toes. I'm wet as a jolt of pain fills my mind. A small groan escapes my lips. My body trembles as if I just finished a hardcore workout at the gym as I try to bring my hands beside my chest and start to push myself up. Taking in a sharp breath of air, as if remembering the lack of oxygen, the air is musky and dank, choking violently. It's also full of dust, I mumble to myself. Slowly opening my eyes to take in my surroundings. It's dark, the ground beneath me is hard and gray. Stone, I question out loud, and I seem to be laying in a puddle. That explains the wetness. Finally, managing to pick himself up to a sitting position, my hand makes its way to my pounding head, slowly rubbing it for a minute or two while my eyes adjust to the darkness. "Where am I?" Harith mumbles aloud. My eyesight is finally getting better, and it seems like this awful headache is starting to subside. Glancing around, Harith starts noticing strange marks drawn in random places around the room. Wait just a second. Taking a moment to glance over the marks again. They're not random markings, he ponders. It almost looks like they were in a circular formation and I'm sitting in the center of it. But the water that seems to be pulling here with me has erased the rest of the markings. What is this? My mind starts racing, trying to figure out an explanation. Interrupted from his internal conflict, Harith hears a weak cough coming from somewhere to his right. Oh no, shit, I'm not alone. Harith quickly glances over towards the sound, trying to get to his feet. The coughing sound can be heard again as Harith finally starts to make out the shape of a person slumped on the floor, leaning against the wall. The figure lets out another cough as Harith starts taking in the unknown person's figure. He's old and very pale-looking. His robes look like something a crazy cultist would wear. "What the?" the old man suddenly calls out to Harith. His voice is weak.
It seems the ritual worked. I thought when you first appeared that you had died during the ritual. But after a few minutes of calling out to you, I noticed that you were breathing. So I waited for you to wake up, cough, so not to waste any more energy. I guess I didn't betray my country or the gods for nothing after all.
The man weakly chuckles to himself before going into another coughing fit. Harith, not completely understanding the mad ramblings of an old man, continues looking over the figure before him as his eyes land on the multiple wounds visible on the man's body. Concern taking over his mind for a moment, Harith calls out, "Wait a second. Old man, are you okay?" "You're bleeding." Glancing around the man, finally noticing that the pool of liquid around the old man wasn't water like he expected, but instead a pool of his own blood. Calling out again, "There's blood all over the place. What the hell is this? Am I inside some kind of sacrificial chamber? Are you going to kill me?" Harith's hands clenched into fists as an unbridled rage starts to form in his gut, thinking to himself, "I will not be killed again. And with the pathetic state this old geezer's in, I'll just kick him in the head over and over again until he stops moving, if it comes to that." The old man bringing Harith out of his internal thoughts as he notices him weakly bring up a trembling hand.
No, Cough. My name, Cough, is Merlin. I was once the Archmage for the... You know what?
Coughing again, the old man says,
"It doesn't matter anyway. My time is limited. Listen to me. This place isn't safe. Soon more people will show up, and when they see you,
The man gestures to Harith's figure.
you will be killed. Please, please, by the gods, leave this place. I don't want Edward's and my deaths to be in vain. Cough."
Harith, with a confused expression on his face. "Who is Edward?" The old man slowly starts shaking his head side to side.
"It doesn't matter."
Harith frustratingly replies, "What do you mean it doesn't matter? I'm in a completely unknown place." "You owe me answers, old man," a low growl echoing his tone. The old man puts his head down as if in apology.
"I'm afraid there's not enough time to explain. I brought you here to hopefully save our world. But now that I think of it, maybe the world was always going to be fine, and I was looking for an excuse to save the kingdom and nations I've come to hold so dear in my heart. Cough. Maybe change is for the best."
The old man brings his head up and rests it on the stone wall behind himself.
"Listen to me, lad. Take anything and everything you want from this place. Honestly, I can feel my eyes growing heavier with every second. My time is running out."
Letting out a weak sigh followed by another cough.
"Do you see the robes I'm wearing?"
The man asks. "Yes," Harith replies with a slightly confused tone in his voice.
Good, good.
the old man replies. Harith cuts the old man off before he can continue. You're not going to ask me to take the clothes off a dying man, are you? Merlin weakly chuckles.
No, take them from my corpse. I'd like a little bit of dignity before I die.
Continuing, he says,
You might not realize this, but you're not in your own world anymore.
Harith freezes for a moment. In his head, he already could guess as much. But hearing it from a complete stranger, he could feel a ball forming in his guts. Weakly replying, Harith says, I'm not. Merlin tries to speak again, but goes into a coughing fit once again, this time more violently than the others. Harith starts panicking in his mind. I don't know what to do. That old man was finally getting to some useful information. Wait, what am I thinking? He is dying and I'm being selfish. Shit. Quickly moving closer to Merlin, Harith kneels down by the dying man's side. Harith starts speaking out loud. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help you, but Merlin puts his hand on Harith's trembling hands, shaking just above the old man's wounded shoulder.
Truly,
Merlin begins.
if you want to help me, then find a way to stop all the chaos that is going on around the world. But listen closely.
Harith leans in a bit closer to hear everything Merlin has to say.
I have 2 more pieces of advice for you. 1. Somewhere in this mess here I have a book. It covers a wide range of knowledge of this world.
Merlin coughs once again and Harith winces, almost feeling the old man's last words. Merlin continues.
It covers language, geographical areas, such as kingdoms and maps of the regions, forests, roads, and some information on beasts and monsters that live among us, and so much more. I'm sorry that I cannot teach you all of this myself as I intended to.
He grimaces. Harith shakes his head and says, It's okay. Please continue. Merlin weakly nods.
Take the book. Learn everything you can. Try not to stand out too much, lest you get discovered for who you are. My last piece of advice, again, please take my robes when I pass.
Harith starts shaking his head. How? Why? He says to the man before him, feeling tears welling up at the sides of his eyes.
The robes are magical, boy. They will take on whatever form that you will them to.
Harith mumbles to himself. Magical? Merlin coughs again, this time weaker than before, his eyes starting to sink towards the ground.
They're powerful robes. I'm an archmage after all. They'll help to protect you.
His hand becoming limp on top of Harith's own and sliding off next to his body. Weak coughs escape his lips.
Good luck.
Are the last words Harith hears escape Merlin's lips as he sees the old man's eyes go empty, hearing his final breath leaving his body. What in the actual hell is this? Did I die? Am I dreaming? Maybe I'm in hell. I'm definitely not seeing angels and fluffy clouds or golden arches. Okay, me, just calm down. Take in your surroundings. Identify the situation and find a solution. Everything will be fine. Chapter 2. Harith takes a few moments to catch his breath and steady his thoughts. All right, so I was indeed brought to another world. Looking around the cave, it's really not that large. Seems like one big chamber with 2 passages leading in opposite directions. Looking down at the old man's body, I'm not sure if I can justify taking clothes off of a dead man. Isn't that disrespectful? Not to mention with this world having magic, what are the odds I won't end up with some kind of ghost coming from the grave to haunt me? Harith scoffs at the idea. That's not possible, right? But then again, he did tell me to take them as his literal dying words, sighing. And he did mention that they're magical, or maybe enchanted is the better term. I don't understand. This is all so unbelievable. First, I didn't die. I instead got transported. I come out here and some dying old man tells me, here's all my stuff. Oh, and you better leave quickly before some guys come and kill you. Seriously, why me? Okay, well, I won't make any progress just standing here, and honestly, I'm not going to stick around and just wait to get myself killed. Looking towards one of the passageways, Harith begins walking. The terrain doesn't change much, although instead of just wet stone, there seems to be some kind of moss growing along the floor and walls. There also seems to be some dirt here and there along this path, subtly sloping upwards after just a couple minutes walking. The passage widens and opens up, If I had to guess, 3 people could stand shoulder to shoulder here. Looking up ahead, there seems to be a couple lumps on the ground. Slowly moving a bit further, I can just start to make out subtle details from the lumps. It seems to be capes, some leather armor, metal guards. Huh. So these are dead people wearing armor. Like in video games or from TV, I assume this is where Merlin got those wounds from. And I also guess that means he wasn't lying about people coming here soon. Well, what to do? What to do? Looking over the bodies, it almost looks like they were burned. They have huge black scorch marks in a ring shape along their bodies in different places. Like the first guy here has a burn on his chest and on his lower back. The second guy has one on his side and his upper back, while the last guy here has one on his neck and upper chest. Just what happened to these guys? Kneeling down, I put my hand on the leather armor, thinking that maybe I could use this. But the armor is brittle feeling. Giving it a bend test, the piece of leather my hand is holding onto just snaps off. I don't think this is right. Looking along the belt of the first guy, I also find a small pouch hanging off his side, partly open with something shiny in it. Oh, what do we have here? Something shiny. Reaching out and pulling the bag open, I see a small pile of coins. There's 5 silver and 5 gold. Well, money's good. Not seeing anything else of value. I suppose I'll check the other 2 knights here for some shiny friends to add to this pouch and see what's at the end of this tunnel. After picking up the rest of the coins and getting ready to head out, I notice something up against the wall. Stepping a bit closer cautiously, it seems to be another body. But this one is in a bit better condition. I mean, he isn't burned. But how did he? Wait, what if he isn't dead? Carefully stepping closer, watching the man for any sudden movements, Harith slowly kneels down beside him. Okay, his chest doesn't seem to be moving. But I better be sure, slowly reaching my hand in front of his mouth and nose, careful not to touch him, I hold extremely still, unconsciously holding my breath, feeling for a breath. But nothing. Swallowing down hard a mouthful of saliva, I take 2 fingers and place them gently on the man's neck, checking for a pulse. A few long moments goes by, but I can't seem to find it. He's dead, okay? Taking a second to look the man over more closely, he seems to be wearing a better version of the leather the other 3 were wearing. I think this would be studded leather, right? Slowly running my fingers across some metal protruding from the armor. And he has some kind of metal guards on his shins and forearms. But what I do see other than that is another coin pouch. Don't mind if I do. Taking the coins out and adding them to the pouch I took from the first guard. That's not a bad haul. I ended up with 12 silver and 23 gold pieces. I have no clue what the actual worth is of all this, but I'm sure I can at the very least get a room in some kind of tavern or inn. After taking the man's coins, I notice 2 more things that catch my attention, first of which being the man's hand. There's a gold band with a purple stone set in the middle. I feel gross for this, but I don't think a dead man will miss it, reaching out and grabbing the man's stiff hand, gagging internally. Oh, this is gross. I've always read about rigor mortis, but to actually feel a hand experiencing it. Let's just quickly get this done. Slipping the ring off, it doesn't seem special. Oh man, I feel like crap. What if this is some kind of wedding ring? Hesitating whether or not to put it back on the man's finger, I just quickly put it in my coin purse. Nope. I experienced the trauma of taking it off. I'll keep the ring as compensation. And considering there's no angry ghost from the other dead guards I robbed blind, it's fine. The last object of notice was this man's sword. It looked different than the others, hence my interest. Where the other long swords look as you'd imagine a sword to look like, this one seemed a bit fatter and maybe a bit longer. Is this a different kind of longsword? I pondered to myself. Picking the sword up off the ground near the body, it has runes that stretch along the core of the sword from hilt to a couple inches from the tip, and it almost feels like it's emitting some kind of energy, similar to holding 2 magnets against each other and getting that repelling feeling. That's weird, but maybe that means this sword's enchanted as well. Taking another glance at the fallen knight on the ground a short distance from the sword, my eyes find themselves glancing along the man's waist. Ah, crap, I need that belt for the scabbard for the sword. So that means, damn it. After a couple minutes fumbling with a buckle and some tugging, I've acquired myself a nice new leather belt with a scabbard attached to it for the sword. I'm also scarred for life and need to wash my sins away, glancing at my right palm. Taking a few moments to put the leather belt around my waist and clumsily putting the sword in the sheath, I never really thought much about it. But this is actually awkward to wear, like it's heavier than I expected. I almost feel like it's pulling down on my side and it's uncomfortable. Sighing, well, I guess it's just something else to add to my growing list of things to get used to. Okay, let's continue up this damn path and see what else we can find. Walking for less than a minute and coming around a small bend, I can see light. Oh, look at that. There is light at the end of the tunnel. Crap. Stopping and looking back into the cave. Merlin's book. It has to be down the opposite path I didn't take. Glancing at the light once more, I turn around and start backtracking. After a short walk, I find myself walking through the room my journey started in, heading towards the other passageway this time. But I can't help but glance at the old man's body again. Sighing, okay, fine. I'll take your robes off your bloody corpse. Just give me a couple minutes to rummage through the rest of your stuff. Just make sure you don't decide to come back and haunt me, okay? Looking forward and continuing along the rocky path, this one is much shorter than the others. It's more of a small archway that stretches maybe 2 or 3 feet, then opens into a small square section, just big enough for an old wooden table and a chair. That seems to be in a few pieces on the floor. Classy. Looking at the table, there is indeed a book, a thick book, some more coins laying around, and an empty vial of some sort. There's also a fairly large-looking coin purse, or maybe a small sack. If I was a betting man, I'd say that's where all this stuff was stored, excluding that big-ass book. The book looks to be in pretty good condition. It looks, in my opinion, like something you'd see on TV. It's leather-bound, and the pages, from what I can see on the side, are thick and milky gray in color. Definitely not the quality I'm used to. Gently opening the book to the first page, I'm mildly amused and annoyed at the same time. It's in another language. Nice, I can't read any of this. Flipping through a few more pages. Their alphabet is made up of almost flowing symbols, like cursive from back home. But more, what's the word, primitive. Well, this is worthless, but I'll keep a hold of it for now until it turns into more of a burden to carry around than it's worth. I don't have a backpack and this thing isn't going to fit into either of these sacks. Speaking of which, my hand untying the smaller coin pouch from my side and pulling it open, placing it on the table. This other one will be better for all the coins, not to mention anything else I may find and need space for. Reaching out and grabbing the other bag, it's made of fabric instead of leather like the one I had. It's also larger. Like, imagine a women's hand purse in size for reference. But as I flip the bag around to see if there's anything else inside, I'm left flabbergasted. Looking at what should be the mouth of the bag, I see nothing, and not like empty nothing. Like a black void? Nothing. If I move the bag side to side, shake it, throw it at the table, it's still there when I look at it. Now my nerd senses are tingling looking at this thing. Part of me wants to yell dimensional storage bag, but the other part of me wants to say witchcraft burn it. Okay, it's time for science. Putting the bag down onto the table opening facing up. I look across the table. I need to put something in here and see what happens. The first thing my eyes rest on for a moment is the empty glass vial on the table. But after hesitating for a moment, I decide against it. I mean, if I can find a cork, I can reuse it. And I sure as hell am not going to throw a coin in there. Remembering the broken chair, I turn to the side and bend down, rummaging through the pile of debris. After finding a suitable sized piece of wood, I stand back up and hold it over the bag. Okay, so I guess I'll just drop it in. Releasing the stick from my hand, it falls in and disappears. Weird. No rippling effect, no movement from the bag. Nothing, just one less stick. One more time just to be sure. After fetching another test stick and again dropping it just for the same thing to happen, Harith looks at the glass vial again. Okay, 3 times. But this time, I'll put my hand up closer, grabbing the glass vial from the table, holding the very edge of it, and slowly, very slowly, inching his way closer to the bag. The glass vial just sinks into the bag. After the vial is a little over halfway submerged into the bag, it just begins to absorb itself into the bag. Harith quickly jumping back at the sudden feeling of the vial being pulled in by some other force. Oh boy, I don't like that. Okay, well, this is awesome and also a bit terrifying. See, I'm familiar with this item in a lot of fantasy settings. You see in most, or at least a lot of games and books, there's dimensional storage devices like a bag or ring, bracelet, etc. And if this is what I have, I'm lucky to find something like this. What scares me, though, is I also played a lot of tabletop games like Dungeons and stuff. In that game, there's another item called a bag of hunger, where instead of safely storing your item, it eats anything put inside. But I can't think of any reason an item like that would be here. The old man seemed to be trying to help me, and all this stuff scattered on the table makes me think it was definitely his. Closing my eyes and sharply sucking in a breath of air, I thrust my hand into the bag, screaming stick over and over inside my head. After a brief moment, I immediately feel two things. First, my fingers. Secondly, there's a stick there wrapped around. Okay, I have a bag, a real dimensional bag. This is great, quickly sliding everything from the table into the bag, which is the remaining coins, and the big book that I can't read yet. I also take my smaller coin purse and toss the whole thing inside. Quickly tying the bag to my newly acquired leather belt, I start heading back to the room Merlin's in, kneeling down next to the man. I bow my head and say a silent prayer to whatever God can hear me. Please guide this man's soul to the afterlife. I didn't know him long, but in a way he saved my life. Thinking back to the near-death experience in the other world. You know, now that I think of it, I wonder what ended up happening. I'm stalling, shaking my hands out and stealing my resolve. I start undressing Merlin. I mean, sure, I took a couple things from the dead guards, but this guy was a good man from the little bit of time I got to spend with him. It just feels wrong. Luckily for me, though, it looks like he is also wearing a light tunic and what I call long shorts made from equally light material. Too bad there's a giant gash in the shirt, and I don't want to test my luck if they have underwear in this world. He also has a ring. I just had to notice it while pulling up his arms to remove the robes. Damn my impulses, because it's now laying in the middle of my palm. I kind of wish there was a way for me to identify items or something. I mean, he had a bag, these robes, and a ring. It has to be enchanted. But I wonder what would happen if I put it on myself. He was wearing it, so there's a low chance that anything bad should happen. Holding the ring up to my fingers, I'm quickly finding a slight problem. His hands were smaller than mine. Pushing the ring against the knuckle of my left pinky finger, the ring suddenly enlarges just enough to slip over the knuckle and set snugly on the finger. That was cool. I don't feel any different, and the ring isn't doing anything. But at least I have a cool resizing ring. Let's just push out the potential thoughts that I've just stolen a dead man's wedding ring. But then again, he told me to take anything and everything that I believe could be of some use. Standing up and with a grimace on my face, I look at the robes. They're a bright red base color with purple trim around the collar, wrists, and along a pattern that stretches from the chest down to the legs and around the waist. It's a bit tacky, I think, internally. I'm sorry, Merlin, but this is tacky. Walking towards the small pool of water gathering around the center of the room, I kneel down and begin washing the blood from the 2 slash marks left from the assumed battle in the next hallway over. I guess either they are still better than nothing, but are these better than the leather armor? Standing up and wringing out the robes as best as possible, I remove my new sword belt with the dimensional bag attached to it and start pulling the robes over my head. Once they're on and I hold my arms out to see my reflection in the water, I'm shocked to see the robes starting to stitch themselves back together in front of my eyes. While that's happening, I can also feel the fabric in some places tightening and readjusting themselves. It feels weird. Finally, the colors begin changing. Starting from the central trim pattern on the chest, the red fabric begins changing to a deep black, leaving the shoulders a dark red with black cracks stretching through it like lightning or cracks in glass. The purple trim starts changing to a dark gold color. When everything stops changing, excluding the 2 holes that are slowly being fixed, I look at my reflection once again. I mean, it looks kind of cool in an edgy kind of way. I feel like that goth kid in middle school again. No offense, I muttered to nobody in particular. But there is one problem. Compared to the guards I seen towards the entrance, and my guess of common clothing based on the tunic and shorts Merlin was wearing under the robes, I feel like I'm going to stand out like crazy if I come across people. An idea pops into Harith's head. Looking at Merlin's clothes, he starts to describe the simple tunic and shorts to himself. When he is done, he starts to push the thoughts towards his new robes. After a few attempts, he watches as the sleeves of the robes turn into the same tunic worn by Merlin. The only difference being his sleeves or the full length of his arms. The same seems to happen to the pants. Okay, so it seems that the robes must make material that's already existent. Got it. The robes have long sleeves, so whatever it morphs into will have long sleeves. Makes sense. Now that I look more like a villager, or at the very least someone that belongs here, I should do something about these shoes. Glancing down to his feet. Ha! Well, Merlin, it looks like today's your lucky day. I think those knights in the other room had a pair of boots that should fit nicely. Walking back towards the entrance of the cave, Harith changes his footwear, tossing his work shoes into the dimensional bag. Continuing around the bend, Harith is greeted by the sunlight shining through the doorway. Chapter 3. Stepping through the exit of the cave, Harith raises his hand to shade his eyes from the sunlight. Glancing around, I can see more stone, and lots of it. But just up ahead, there seems to be the edge of the cliff. Slowly making his way further from the entrance of the cave, Harith is momentarily awestruck by the scenery before him. A massive forest stretches into the horizon, the sky bright and blue, with the occasional cloud lazily floating along. Turning around, Harith takes in the mountain that he is currently standing on. From his location, he could guess that he is more or less only halfway up. Craning his neck to look up, the mountain peaks seem to poke through a cloud. Looking on either side of him, it seems that the mountains run for miles. There seems to be a small footpath to my left, and I'm not seeing anything indicating a trail to the right. Turning and heading to the only path available, Harith starts making his way, after roughly an hour of hiking over fairly difficult terrain. Harith notices a dip in the path ahead, getting within a few feet of it. What looked like a dip was actually a crevice formed through the stone and stretching into the mountain itself. Nope. Coming to a stop and peeking over the edge. Damn, that would be a nasty fall. It seems to go all the way to the bottom of the mountain. A shiver uncontrollably runs down my spine as I imagine falling, bouncing off the mountainside before going splat at the bottom. Oh, I hate heights with a passion. All right, on the bright side, it's only about 6 feet wide. All I have to do is take a few steps and jump. Simple. Backing up a few steps and preparing the lunge forward, that little bit of momentum carrying the sword strapped to my hip casually swings around and bumps into my knee. Then swinging back, it also bumps into the back of my thigh, the hair starting to stand up on the back of my neck as I unwillingly imagine being tripped mid-stride by the sword and stumbling into the crack to what would be a horrible death. Nope. Quickly unlatching the buckle of the belt and carefully walking to the edge of the path. Belt held firmly in one hand, I start to swing my arm forward and back. After a couple swings and feeling kind of confident that I won't accidentally throw the belt and sword off the side of the cliff, I let go and watch the sword hit the ground on the other side. Okay, that's good. Now it's my turn. Taking a few large steps back, Harith lunges forward, jumping across the crevice and landing on the other side, turning around and quickly re-equipping the belt and taking one more glance at the hole. Mumbling to himself, yeah, I hate heights. The further along the path I get, it does seem to be going down, albeit very slowly. I've finally gotten to about the same elevation as the treetops themselves. Taking a moment to look around the forest floor through what gaps he can see. It doesn't seem very dense. I'm not seeing a lot of undergrowth. The trees also seem to be a bit taller than I'm used to back on Earth. And the final thing that brings me more relief than I thought is the fact I can hear birds. So hopefully, if things work somewhat similar here, that means there shouldn't be any predators nearby. Finally reaching the foot of the mountain, glancing around. They look so much bigger from down here, not to mention looking to the left and right of himself. The mountain range looks like it really does go for miles. I wonder if they hold any importance, Harith ponders to himself. Maybe when I get a bit more established, I can come back and do a little exploring. Turning his head to face the forest in front of him, letting out a sigh, I really hope there isn't the equivalent of, like, magical poison ivy. Ha. But seriously, I'm kind of scared. Who knows what's in there? The sun is starting to go down. There's supposedly the looming threat of people coming to hunt me down. Who knows what kind of monsters go bump in the night? Okay, calm down. I should just keep an eye out for anything I can use as a shelter and water. After that, I'll figure things out as I go. Looking at the sword strapped to my side, I've never even swung a real sword. I'm more likely to accidentally cut my own damn leg off. I suppose I should add sword practice to the growing list of things to do, right up there with shelter and water. Because God's help me if I run into something. I'm stalling again, swallowing the saliva pooling in the back of my throat. I take my first steps into the looming forest in front of me. Walking on past trees and shrubs, taking in the natural beauty of my surroundings. The forest is vast, but it's not quite as dense as I first thought. Looking at it from the mountain. Luckily for me, the undergrowth is fairly sparse as well. It's more like hard dirt with patches of grass along the breaks in the canopy above and bushes. Speaking of which, I come to a stop next to a bush that has thin branches and small leaves. But that's not what caught my eye. What did, though, are the clumps of berries all over the branches? I wonder aloud. They almost look like blackberries. And there's some thorns along the branches, which makes me wonder if they're edible. I'm not sure if this is a good idea, but I need food. Gently reaching out and plucking a berry off the bush, I bend down and pick up a small twig off the ground. Using the twig, I poke it into the berry, exposing some juice. Careful not to let any get on my fingers, I then take the berry and begin to rub some of the juice on my wrist. Okay, now we wait to see if there's any reaction. After waiting a couple minutes, carefully watching the spot, not seeing any reddening of the skin, I reach out and pick another berry from the bush, and this time using my other hand to pull the berry apart to release some of the juices and pull down my lower lip. Rubbing the berry on the skin, I wait for any discomfort. After another couple minutes, I think they're safe, picking 3 berries and throwing them into my mouth. They're really sweet and juicy, Harith exclaims. Wow, these are great. I normally hate berries, but these are good. Hesitating, Harith reaches into the dimensional bag at his side and pulls out the small coin purse. Opening the bag and removing the coins, he places them back into the dimensional bag with all the others and starts to pick berries, placing them into the smaller bag. As much as I want to fill my mouth with these amazing berries, I need to wait a little while to see how the couple I already ate will make my stomach feel. I'm so far in the wilderness, I under no circumstances can risk getting poisoned or sick. That would more than likely kill me. Finishing his task, Harith places the small bag back into the dimensional storage. We're off. With no clear destination in mind, I've been just walking a straight line from the mountains, doing my best to not divert from a straight line. This way, if something happens, I can always make my way back and head off in another direction. After walking for what felt like a couple hours, the light trickling in from the trees above has been gradually getting darker. At this point, I can hardly see 20 or 30 feet ahead of myself. This isn't good, Harith speaks aloud. Looking around, the only thing I see worth using as a makeshift shelter is a fallen tree with a hole through the center of it. Honestly, that's terrifying. Who knows what kind of bugs are in this world? Harith pictures massive spiders, his skin starting to crawl. Taking off at a steady jog, quickly looking left and right, I'm not experienced enough to even attempt climbing a tree and trying to sleep in the branches. I'll fall and break my neck. After a few more minutes of scanning the woods, Harith stops. Water. I hear moving water. Putting my hands up to my ears and moving my head side to side, trying to discern what direction the sound is coming from. Harith suddenly starts running again. It's right over here, he thinks to himself, coming up on a thicker patch of bushes ahead of him. Slowing down and walking along the greenage until a small opening presents itself. Harith looks through, delighted to see a small stream cutting through the forest. Okay, this isn't bad. Crouching down alongside the bushes and glancing up and down the small stream, watching for any movement or animals around the area, Harith slowly edges his way closer to the water. Okay, it's getting dark. I don't hear anything. I'm also not seeing anything. Looking down into the water, it's crystal clear, a smile forming on my face. Okay, this is a good sign. Putting his hands into the moving water, it's really cold. I wonder if it's from a natural spring. That might be worth checking out, pulling my hands out of the water, happy to not be so dirty. I bring them closer to my face and start to sniff them. I also don't smell anything funny from the water. Cupping his hands and filling them with the water and bringing it up to his lips, taking a small sip and swishing it around my mouth, then spitting it onto the dirt next to me. Excitedly reaching my hands back into the water and starting to drink as fast as I could. This tastes great. It reminds me of the spring water from my childhood home. It has to be. I should definitely follow this upstream and see if I can set up a little camp in the area. Taking a couple moments to catch my breath, I fill my hands once again. But this time, instead of drinking it, I splash it onto my face a couple more times of this, feeling cleaner and a bit more relaxed. It's practically dark at this point. I can hardly see a thing. And if there's a moon above us, I can't see it from this angle, and it's not really that bright. Well, I guess for tonight I'll just sleep inside one of these bushes here along the water's edge. The bushes here are much thicker than the berry bush I found with the berries. Oh, wait. Berries? Harith reaches into his pouch and pulls out the coin purse filled with those juicy sweet berries. I never got sick or stomach cramps from the few I ate earlier, not to mention. Putting his hand on his stomach as a small groan can be heard. I haven't eaten anything all day. Climbing inside the thickest group of bushes Harith could find, he slowly starts eating the berries from his pouch while planning in his head. First thing tomorrow morning, I'll follow the stream and hopefully find the source. After that, I'll scout out the area and maybe find something I can use for shelter. A small cave or something like that would be perfect. But if worse comes to worse, I can always build a small lean-to. But before that, I seriously need to find food. I can't live on a diet of water and berries. For now, I'm okay, but I really don't want to starve to death. The biggest issue is I have nothing to use to hunt. So what's the best way to catch something? All I have is this sword. I highly doubt an animal will just stand there and let me clobber it to death. Sighing to himself. Shouldn't I have been given something to help me? Like a system or something? After saying system, Harith is startled when a small blue box appears in his vision. What the? Reaching a hand up and watching his fingers pass right through it, Harith takes a moment to look at the screen. At the top, his name is in bold letters, Harith Boyer. Attribute points available, 0. Strength, 12. Dexterity, 12. Constitution, 10. Hit points, 13. Arcane, 20, uncapped. Spell points, 10. For additional information, please view stats individually. Additional status abnormalities detected. Creating subcategory. Name-generated gift. For additional information, please view category, gift individually. Okay, now this looks promising. I'm interested to know what spell points are, but I think I'll start from the top. Harith says internally, Strength. Strength determines the amount of physical power one can exert on their surroundings. Example, lifting heavier objects. Dexterity. This determines one's agility. Example, movement speed. Constitution determines one's physical endurance. Example, amount of damage taken before succumbing to injury. Arcane. This determines one's connection with the world's natural mana. Example, amount of mana able to be manipulated before experiencing exhaustion. Spell points determines available stored mana. Example, allowing for fast casting of spells. Okay, this all makes sense. Let's see what gift is. Gift. This system was a gift bestowed to you from constantly shifting letters appear. Harith tries to make sense of it, but the longer he looks, a migraine similar to the one he experienced when first gaining consciousness. Letting out a groan, Harith skips past the name and continues reading. This system will grant you the ability to continuously grow. Most living beings of your new world are capped at birth with the ability to raise their individual stats by 1 or 2 points respectively. You, however, can gain experience by fighting monsters and other living beings to absorb their experience, allowing you to gain ability points after meeting certain thresholds, thus allowing you continuous growth. With the power bestowed by my greatness, I have also uncapped your arcane stat. This allows you to continuously strengthen your bond with mana, which in turn allows you to use much stronger spells. I've also granted to you spell points. Spell points allows you to passively absorb mana into your body, using these points to cast spells without the need of gathering mana via incantations. However, higher-tier magical spells will require a greater number of spell points. Using spell points will also negate the fatigue of spellcasting. However, if spell points are exhausted, you may cast spells using incantations, but you will be affected by fatigue at twice the normal rate. Also under the gift tab, there's one more skill, or whatever these are called, passive abilities maybe. Anyway, it says Child of Chaos. This allows one to create spells as long as the fundamental understanding is adequate enough to facilitate the wanted effect. Wow, I inwardly say. That seems really powerful. So with that knowledge, I should be a really powerful mage. But now I'm wondering, what's the limit of stats and what's the average? Also, how does one use magic? Looking back at the status menu, I'm not seeing anything else I can look into for more information or tabs. So do I need to find someone to teach me spells? Or do I learn them from a scroll or something? It's too dark to even consider looking through that book Merlin gave me. But even if I did, I can't read the damn thing. I guess magic is out of the cards for now. Closing the status menu and looking around, listening for anything other than insects chirping, Harith starts falling in and out of consciousness. Eyes snapping open, Harith's heart quickly beating. I fell asleep. That was stupid. What if something come after me in the middle of the night? Looking through the bush at his surroundings, I don't see anything. Taking a moment to listen, I can only hear the sound of water and birds. Okay, patting his chest. All is good. I'm not all that deep from the mountains. Maybe if there are more hostile animals, they are deeper in. Slowly and carefully crawling out of the bush, Harith stretches his body, rubbing at his sides and back. Not going to lie, sleeping on the ground like that hurts. It's not comfortable, not to mention it's cold. I'm bloody freezing. Rubbing his hands together, Harith looks up and down the stream and starts to follow along its edge. Okay, let's go upstream and see if we can figure out where it's coming from. For the past few miles, the stream has been a consistent 6 to 8 feet wide and maybe a foot or two deep. But as I walk around a bend, I can see a small pond before me. Beyond the pond, the water continues to flow in from somewhere deeper in the forest. I could stop here for a while, maybe find some food. Looking into the small pond, it's a lot deeper here as well, maybe 4 or 5 feet deep, noticing some movement beneath the water. Harith spots some fish darting around beneath its surface. Aye, look at that. There's food. All I need to do is figure out how to catch some. Looking around the area, the pond is situated in the center of a clearing in the trees, the canopy opening up into an almost perfect circle around the pond. On one side, there's a small hill, and on the side Harith is standing is a clearing, with bushes and shrubs all around the perimeter. You could build a small cabin here if you wanted to. It's really a beautiful little area. I think I might just call this my temporary home. Taking some time to walk around the area collecting large sticks, Harith is also taking note of all the surroundings and sounds. I'm not seeing any tracks left behind by larger animals either. This is great. Leaning the largest stick up against the Y section of a nearby tree to the pond, Harith starts to build a lean-to. After finishing the skeleton of his soon-to-be makeshift sleeping area, he walks around the pond looking for moss along a section of the hill stretching behind the pond. There's a huge section of the stuff. Harith pulls the sword from its sheath and begins using it to cut strips out of the moss, along with a few squares. This will make a wonderful insulator for my lean-to. After making a couple trips back and forth, Harith begins placing the moss on top of the wood, doing his best to make sure it's completely covered in moss and dirt. Taking a few steps back with his hands on his hips, Harith observes his handiwork. It looks good. I haven't made one of these since I was in Boy Scouts. Walking back towards the water, Harith looks up and down the pond. Walking towards the section where the water flows out, Harith starts picking up large rocks and placing them in a U-shape along the stream, careful to leave plenty of small gaps for water to easily pass through, but hopefully preventing any of the fish from being able to escape downstream. Chapter 4. Sitting on the edge of the pond, looking into the water. I wonder what my best option is for catching anything. I don't have anything other than my hands and this sword, glancing down towards it. I guess I could just sharpen a couple of sticks into makeshift spears and try it that way. But the water is deep, and they'd have to be pretty dense to get that far. I know for a fact I don't have the strength alone to throw them hard enough to reach the bottom with enough force to skewer a fish. Glancing over to the small dam I built a little while ago, they could wander into that area given enough time. Then I'd have a much easier chance. I could also build a small dam behind the first one, leaving a large enough gap for fish to pass through, then throw a log in the way to close it off and prevent them from escaping. Finishing his next little project, all I need now is a large piece of wood, but I only seen logs that are way too long. Glancing at the sword once again, I should rename you Multi-Tool. I might not have an axe, but this will do. Plus, it'll give me the opportunity to really swing this thing a few times. Hopefully, it'll help me with strengthening my grip in the inevitable situation I need to use it to defend myself. Walking to a perfectly sized log for Harith's needs, he begins swinging the sword in a downward motion. Upon impact with the wood, the sword bites deep into it. Dislodging the sword and swinging it again, the sword continues to cut deep into the log. After a few minutes of this, Harith finally finishes cutting through the wood and pulls the sword up in front of himself to take a look at the damage to the blade. Wow, this thing is resilient. There's not even a scratch or nick on the blade. Shrugging and putting the sword away, he grabs the log and begins to drag it to the side of the stream. As he arrives, there seems to already be a fish between the two dams. Perfect. Let's give this idea of mine a test run, tipping the log over, blocking the passage, preventing the fish from escaping. Harith quickly grabs 2 of his prepared spears and steps into the water, stabbing down repeatedly with the spears, but missing every time. Damn, this is a lot harder than I thought it would be. Quickly following the fish, he stabs down again. The fish, jumping from the water to escape the spear, lands on the bank and starts flopping around. Quickly throwing the spears down here, Harith jumps onto the fish to prevent it from going back into the water. "Gotcha!" he exclaims. Grabbing another spear, he puts the sharp end through the fish and washes the dirt off. Now I have another problem. How am I supposed to cook this? I don't have any fire. I also have no idea how to make a fire with primitive means, despite watching plenty of videos about it. Walking towards his lean-to, Harith begins to think. Leaning the spear up against the tree with the fish still attached, he sits down. So according to my status screen, and that passive ability Child of Chaos, I should be able to create spells. But how does that work? Do I just visualize what they look like? And their purpose? I have spell points as well, so I don't need to worry about incantations or whatever. Okay, so all I need is a small fire. Harith rests his arm on his knee with his hand balled up, the thumb pointing up. Closing his eyes, he starts to visualize a small candle that has a single dancing flame. Removing everything but the gently dancing flame from his mind, he focuses on that. Okay, now I need this small flame to form above my thumb. Opening one of his eyes, he sees a small yellow flame dancing right above his thumb, quickly opening both eyes in shock. Harith is dumbfounded. The small flame, with no cares in the world, just gently dancing to the wind passing by. It took some focus, but that was easy. Is magic really this easy? Or maybe it has something to do with my absurdly high arcane stat, making it easier for me. I'll have to experiment with this later. Right now, though, I need to build a fire and start cooking this fish. As Harith is saying this, his stomach chimes in with a loud gurgle. Rubbing his stomach with his other hand, Harith brings his thumb closer to himself and gives the flame a quick look over one more time before willing the flame to disperse. A bit of work, and sometime later, Harith is sitting a few feet outside his lean-to with a small stone ring fireplace and a small fire inside it. Taking 2 Y-shaped sticks and driving them into the ground on either side of the fire, Harith finally lays his first catch across them and begins cooking the fish. After finishing his meal and looking over his surroundings one more time, Harith climbs into his lean-to and closes his eyes. Waking up the next morning, Harith peeks out from his lean-to and inspects his surroundings. The sound of water calmly flowing and birds chirping make Harith smile. This is nice. I miss electronics and the comforts from my world, but I feel accomplished. Quickly crawling out from inside his temporary home and walking towards the fish trap, Harith sees 2 more fish mindlessly swimming against the currents. Ah, look at you guys. It's like you're waiting for me to come and pick you up. Dropping the log across the entrance again and picking up his spears, Harith catches 2 more fish. Leaning one against a tree and placing the other over his fireplace, he sits down to prepare himself some breakfast. After cooking and eating the fish, Harith is sitting along the edge of the pond once again. Thinking back to the other day, when he was visualizing fire for the first time. See, the only thing that doesn't make any sense to me is when I cast that spell, it doesn't take any spell points. Now the only thing it's good for is making a fire, but still, is it simply too weak to consume the mana required of a spell point? If that's the case, is it just using the ambient mana around me to fuel it? I should do some testing and try making another spell. I need something offensive in case I run into trouble. Or more likely, trouble finds me. Closing his eyes, Harris starts to think. Offensive spell. I shouldn't use fire. I could burn the forest down with me included. I don't want to test out earth magic yet, simply because I don't want to ruin my surroundings. Let's do something like a magic missile spell. Oh yeah, that's perfect. Not to mention one of my favorite spells playing as a wizard in tabletop games. Taking a few moments to clear his head of any other thoughts, Harith starts imagining what the spell should look like. A ball of energy in the shape of a sphere, about the size of a baseball. He sees a small baseball-sized pink ball form in his mind. Okay, perfect. Now the spell is target-based, so when I see a target, the energy ball will form above my head and lock onto the target, launching itself at high speeds, doing everything it can to hit them. Weight can mana even follow commands like that. Okay, the spell will form itself above my head and launch itself at my chosen target. Visualizing in his head, Harith puts himself standing some distance away from a target. He imagines pointing at the target and 3 orbs of energy forming, one positioned above each shoulder, while the last one is above his head. Then the balls launching them selves into the target, blasting baseball-sized indentations into it. Okay, I think I got it. Standing up and looking around, Harith looks at a tree branch some distance away, lazily encroaching in his nice clearing. Pointing a finger at the middle of the branch, Harith speaks aloud, "Magic missile," as he feels something happening around him. Then 3 pinkish spheres go flying towards the branch, all hitting close to the indicated area. Eyes wide, Harith has a stupid smile plastered across his face. Looking for another branch, he stands to the side, only being able to see the branch from his peripheral vision, and this time saying "magic missile" inside his mind, he once again feels something. Then 3 orbs go launching forward, then sharply curving midair to slam into the tree branch. Okay, this is awesome. I have so many ideas now. Imagine if I could recreate spells from any game I've played. Wait, saying status out loud, Harith looks at his spell points. Spell points, 8 out of 10 remaining. Okay, so that takes 1 spell point each time I cast it. I wonder how long it takes for them to reset, or if maybe I need to sleep. I'll just keep an eye on it throughout the day. Sitting back down, Harith closes his eyes again. I have my flame trick, and now these magic missiles, I need something defensive like a bubble shield or some kind of mana shield that covers just my body. Oh, and maybe a couple others. Hours pass by as Harith sits cross-legged next to the pond. Unknown to him, the relaxing song the birds sing throughout the day has stopped. Peering through some bushes are 3 wart-covered, green-skinned humanoid creatures with yellow eyes and pointed ears. Their mouths open with drool dripping to the ground, wearing nothing but dirty clothes around their genitals and clubs in their hands. They start pushing past the bushes into the clearing. Hearing the rustling of leaves and the absence of the birds, Harith's eyes shoot open. Standing up and looking around, he notices 3 short humanoid-looking monsters pushing through the bushes on the other side of his clearing. Wait, are those goblins? You've got to be kidding me. That's so cliché. But I wonder, hey, can you guys speak? The goblins stop, 2 of them standing in the open while one is halfway through, almost falling as its head snaps up to look at Harith. Hello? Can you understand me? Harith calls out again. The 2 goblins standing there look at each other. The third, finally freeing itself, raises its club. Letting out a growl, it runs past the other 2 straight for Harith. I guess not. Raising one hand, pointing his finger towards the goblin's forehead, Harith says aloud, "Magic dart." A 5-inch, almost ethereal blue dart forms and launches at the goblin. It suddenly stops. The goblin's arm falls slack to its side, dropping the club. It stands there for a moment as blood starts running down its face and over the nose. The goblin falls to the ground, a pool of blood quickly forming around it. The other two goblins watch this, fear evident on their faces, hesitantly taking a few steps before they too start yelling with their clubs raised to the sky. "Magic missile," Harith says, flicking his outstretched finger. 3 pink balls of energy fly out from around him, one heading for the left goblin's solar plexus and another heading for its throat. The last ball flies straight for the other one's head. Watching as the first 2 balls hit the goblin, it falls writhing on the ground. The last ball then slams into the other goblin's head, knocking it off balance. Harith pulls the sword from his hip and starts running towards the goblin still standing. The goblin regains its balance and starts to charge, swinging its club wide. Harith considers trying to parry the attack, but instead choosing to exchange with the goblin. Not having enough confidence to pull something like that off without risking getting wounded. At least this way, I can leave a nasty cut on him, where I'll just suffer some bruising. Swinging his sword onto the goblin's shoulder, he feels some resistance before the blade cuts deep. Harith feels the club smash into his side as he lets out a gasp of breath. Quickly taking a step back, Harith lunges the sword forward into the rebounding goblin's chest. Clawing at the sword for just a moment, the goblin starts going limp. Harith pulls out the sword, feeling something grab his ankle. He looks down to see the second goblin pulling itself towards him with its mouth open. "Oh shit," Harith says aloud, stabbing the sword straight down onto the goblin's back, easily puncturing through the goblin and into the ground. Harith lets go of the sword and quickly steps back. The goblin tries to pull itself free, causing the sword to tear open the flesh. Stopping and attempting to grab at the sword, the goblin's arm hits the ground. A few moments of silence go by before Harith takes a step forward, but there's no reaction. Cautiously approaching the goblins, Harith reaches out and pulls his sword out of the corpse. Looking at all the grime on the blade, he lets out a deep breath, then walks towards the pond, kneeling down to wash off the blood. His hands are shaking. I just killed 3 living beings. In self-defense, sure. But I cut them, not to mention blowing one of their brains out. Heaving what little bit of food he had in his stomach into the pond, Harith finishes cleaning the blade and stands up to put it back in the sheath. "Okay, I need to do something with their bodies. They'll attract something else if I don't. I could take them into the woods and just drop them off, but unless I go pretty far, it could still put me at risk. I'd need to make a bonfire if I decided to try and burn them. Or I could turn them into zombies. I mean, that's not a bad idea. Being out here alone is terrifying, especially after this encounter. I still have 6 spell points left." Quickly walking back to the group of dead goblins, Harith looks them over and holds his hand out over one of the bodies. "Rise." A green cloud forms on Harith's upside-down palm. Slowly, it starts stretching down into the goblin's mouth and ears. Taking a step back, did it work? Suddenly, the corpse twitches, followed by the leg extending. In a few moments, Harith's face changes from horror to excitement, then nervousness as the zombie is standing, looking directly into Harith's eyes. "This is unsettling. Go over there," as I point my finger to the bushes. The zombie turns and slowly walks to the bushes, then turns back around to look at Harith. "Don't look at me. Keep an eye on the woods for anything that poses a threat." The zombie slowly turns towards the forest. "Okay, again, that's unsettling. That took 3 points, which leaves me with 3 more. I was sitting for a while creating new spells, so I'm going to assume I won't get my points back until I sleep. I need to eat something. I'm starving. I lost my lunch over this." Going back over catching a fish and starting the fire, I glance towards my new zombie. He is just standing there. I wonder if it's even looking for anything. It hasn't moved its head at all. Chapter 5. Resting next to the small fire, Harith pulls a fish bone out of his mouth. Tossing it into the fire, he glances at his side. I got hit pretty hard by that goblin's club. Pulling up his shirt to look, but I don't even have a bruise like I thought. Reaching his hand into the dimensional bag at his side, he pulls out the ring he took from the dead guard's body. Moving it around between his fingers, Harith tries to put it on the index finger. Well, it's not perfect, but assuming it's magic, it should shrink. Right? The guard had larger hands than me, it seems, as the ring loosely slides along his finger. Letting go and waiting a moment, the ring does indeed shrink down to a comfortable fit. Chuckling to himself, I'm going to look like some kind of bouncer or mafia boss if I keep adding rings to my fingers like this. Let's see. Bringing up his other hand and lightly touching the ring with his index finger, Harith mumbles to himself, identify. Suddenly a small blue box can be seen above the ring. Ring of minor elemental resistance. This ring can negate a portion of damage received from elemental damage. Harith's brow raises, well, that's a pretty good ring. Glancing at his spell points, I have 2 left, huh? Looking at the ring he acquired from Merlin, Harith touches it and chants, identify, looking at the info box that appears. Ring of spell storing. This ring allows the wearer to store a prepared spell for immediate use upon speaking the command phrase. Cannot hold any spells above the 3rd tier. Oh, that's interesting. So it's the oh shit card, and it also acts like my spell points do. I mean, considering everyone here needs to chant spells, this ring would give someone a huge edge fighting against another magic user. I have 1 more point left. Glancing at his robes and then to the sword. Choices, choices, choices. Putting a finger on his clothing, identify. Archmage robes. These robes are able to protect the wearer from attacks made with non-magical weapons, greatly reducing the damage taken. In addition, these robes help the wearer amplify their spell's output, increasing damage and effects. Lastly, these robes can take on whatever form desired by the wearer, although the forms taken can only be of cloth varieties. Nodding. Yeah, I guess Merlin wasn't kidding. These are pretty great. I guess I'll check the sword tomorrow and raise the other 2 goblins. I wonder how long they'll make it before stinking the place up. Sighing and crawling into his lean-to, Harith closes his eyes, rubbing at his side. Thanks, Merlin. You saved me from a couple broken ribs as well. Waking up the following morning, Harith rubs at his eyes and peeks his head out of the lean-to, his eyes stopping on the goblin zombie. Not 1 single inch. It hasn't moved. A small shiver runs down my spine. That's creepy. But oh well, at least I'm not completely alone, and once I get those other 2 on their feet, I can rest a bit easier. Come to think of it, I wonder where they come from. Crawling out from the comfort of his lean-to, Harith makes his way over to the small pond and begins cleaning himself up before going over to check the fish trap, clicking his tongue. I guess the last couple days I got lucky. There's nothing here today. No matter, I'll just munch on some berries, walking over to the fireplace and taking a few minutes to get it started. Harith takes the sword out from its sheath and rests it on top of his lap, touching the flat of the blade. Harith mumbles, identify. Sword of sharpness. This sword can cut through many materials, including some metals, without losing its edge. Furthermore, this blade has been enchanted with minor maintenance magic, preventing it from rusting. Well, that explains why cutting that log the other day went so well. Carefully sliding the sword back into its sheath, Harith stands up and walks towards the other 2 dead goblins. Raising his hand, rise. The goblin corpses lay still for a moment as the green gas enters their bodies. Arms and legs begin twitching as the lifeless corpses begin to animate. Standing up, their sunken black eyes stare into Harith. You're still incredibly hard to look at, but whatever. Pointing at 2 different spots, Harith sends them off. Keep an eye on the forest for anything that could pose a threat. Walking towards his first zombie, he walks up right beside it, carefully keeping an eye on the unmoving zombie. It doesn't even seem to care that I just stopped right next to it. Unsettling. Looking into the forest, this is the spot where these guys come into my camp from. I wonder where you guys come from, Harith speaks aloud. I'm honestly getting a bit bored. It's been a few days. Productive days, sure, but I mean, should I move out and continue my journey? Turning around facing the clearing, I have a whole arsenal of spells at my disposal, and some pretty good loot. Getting food should be fairly simple at this point, glancing over each of the zombies. I even have an escort now. Peering back into the forest, I think I'll try to catch a fish or 2, pick a bunch of berries, and head out tomorrow morning. Going about my preparations for tomorrow's journey, I hear a grunting noise. What the? Looking at the first of my zombies, It's letting out a groan with its arm lifted up and pointing towards something inside the forest. Wait, did it spot something? Come to me, Harith mentally commands to the zombies. As they come to him, Harith's heartbeat is increasing. Standing here while 3 zombies walk towards you is nerve-wracking. As the zombies form a loose line between Harith and the woodline, the bushes begin to rustle as a pair of green hands start to emerge. More zombies. Goblins, I guess. Continuing to keep an eye on the goblins, that's 4 of them this time. The goblins standing before me are dressed the same as the first 3, but instead of just clubs, 2 of these guys have makeshift spears. Mentally commanding my zombies to attack, I just stand there watching. The new group of goblins tilt their heads as they watch as my zombies approach. Making some kind of confused-sounding noise, one of the goblins suddenly lets out a shriek as if to realize what's happening. Club in hand, it swings towards my zombies, the other goblins quickly following suit. Continuing to stand and watch, I need to see how useful these guys are going to be. Suddenly, a goblin lets out an ear-piercing shriek as one of my zombies has its hands firmly wrapped around the goblin's wrists, preventing it from swinging its club, and the other hand firmly planted on its shoulder with enough force I can see the fingernails piercing into its flesh. The zombie reaches its head forward, sinking its teeth into the goblin's throat. The goblin's shrieking cries turn to gurgles as the zombie pulls its head back with a large chunk of flesh between its jaws, blood spurting from the goblin's neck as it slumps to the ground. "Holy shit," Harith says, eyebrows held high in shock. Glancing over 2 of the other zombies, they have surrounded another goblin, its spear embedded into the gut of one of my zombies, panic visible in its eyes. It tries letting go of the spear and stepping away when the second zombie grabs a hold of its shoulders, preventing it from escaping and sinking its teeth into the poor goblin's back. Shrieking and falling over, taking the zombie with it, I quickly glance at the last 2 goblins that were standing behind the first 2. Dropping their weapons and scrambling through the bushes to escape, my mouth hanging open in shock from what's just happened. I quickly shake my head and start running towards the wood line to watch the goblins retreat, mentally yelling at the zombies to stop mutilating the corpses. Carefully watching the goblins' frantic escape through the woods, it seems like they're just running straight. They don't seem to be turning. Eventually losing sight of them, Harith glances back at the 3 goblins standing behind him and the 2 corpses on the ground. Harith shivers. "You're effective, and it seems you are a bit stronger than your living counterparts." Walking over and removing the spear still stuck in one of the zombies, glancing down. "It's a shame I only have 3 spell points left." Looking to his zombies again, Harith commands 2 of them to follow, while the last one stays to guard the camp. Turning around and heading into the forest, in the direction of the fleeing goblins. "Time for some training," Harith says. After walking just a short distance, Harith rolls his eyes, looking back at his minions. They are just a bit slower than a comfortable walking speed. I suppose that's okay. There's really no rush. Continuing on for some time, Harith starts to hear noises coming from ahead of him. Crouching down and listening intently for a few moments, Harith moves closer to the noise, making his way behind a large tree and looking around it so they live in a small cave. In front of him, he sees a long dirt hill running through the forest. The hill peaks just below the tree canopy above. A doorway, maybe 5 feet tall and 4 feet wide, has 2 goblins sitting around a fire. They have spears. Spotting one leaning against the mound and the other laying on the ground in arm's width of the goblin. Honestly, I'm more surprised they have fire. Aren't goblins supposed to be kind of dumb? It doesn't matter. The real question should be, how do I want to approach this? I can kill them quickly, doing my best to be quiet. But I won't be able to fight inside that place very effectively. I'll have to constantly crouch to even enter. Taking a step out from behind the tree, Harith raises his arm, pointing at one of the goblins. Magic dart, an ethereal dart, forms and flies into the goblin's chest, where Harith assumes the heart should be. Drawing his sword and running to the last goblin, it stumbles to its feet, startled by the sudden attack. Quickly grabbing at its spear and turning to meet Harith, it smiles and thrusts its spear. Harith's eyes go wide as he tries to bring the sword to the side to hit the spear and knock it away from himself. Successfully making contact with the spear, He starts pushing it to the side. Unfortunately, he didn't use enough force fast enough to make the spear completely miss as it scrapes along his side. Wincing in pain, Harith swings the sword back and into the goblin's side. Bringing up his other hand, Harith punches the goblin in the face and pulls back, bringing his sword out of the goblin. Stumbling back, the goblin grabs its spear with both hands and starts running forward, aiming for Harith's stomach. Eyes wide, Harith dives off to the side, landing on the ground hard. Quickly rolling over, he sees the goblin continue forward right into his zombies that were catching up to him. The goblin, stumbling and stabbing the spear into the zombie's chest, freezes in shock as the other zombies start swinging their claws onto the goblin's body, leaving nasty gashes along its back and sides. Collapsing like a heap onto the ground, the zombies stop their attack. Harith looks at the first goblin, confirming its death, then looking down at his side. All right, these robes are pretty good. I thought for sure I'd have a cut from that spear. It seems like they also nullify some of the impact as well, because it didn't hurt all that much. Hearing a loud yell from inside the goblin's nest, Harith is snapped out of his thoughts. Running and placing himself off to the side of the entrance, sword held at his side, he commands the zombies to stand in front of the entrance a few feet back. Not long after, the first goblin comes rushing out of the cave with a club in its hand. After leaving the mouth of the cave, it raises the club above its head and rushes at the zombies, screaming. A moment later, another one holding a spear comes rushing out. Pulling back the sword, Harith thrusts it forward as a third goblin comes running out with a club in its hand. Stabbing into the goblin's side a few inches, he uses his foot to kick the goblin away, ripping out the sword in the process. The goblin goes flying a couple feet before tumbling to the ground. Harith jumps back as another goblin comes rushing out with a club, swinging towards where Harith was just standing. Bringing a hand up and pointing at the goblin in front of him, he says, "Magic missile." 3 baseball-sized orbs form around Harith and take off towards the goblin. Its eyes go wide and tries to dive to the side to escape the attack, but the orb veer off and collide with the goblin mid-air. As it gets knocked back, tumbling a couple times, Harith brings his sword up and swings wide as the first goblin he attacked comes rushing at him, his sword cutting into the goblin's wrist. Letting out a shriek as the sword almost cuts clean through the wrist. Taking a step back, he stabs forward at the goblin's neck. It reaches for the sword, losing a couple fingers in the attempt, but successfully knocking the sword off target. Harith brings the sword back once again and stabs at the goblin a third time. But as he does, he notices movement to his side. The second goblin runs forward, claws outstretched, screaming, leaping onto Harith, knocking him to the ground. The goblin clawing at Harith's arm and side, pulling its head back to attempt to bite at him. Harith brings his other hand over and starts to punch the goblin in the head. Once, twice, 3 times, Harith keeps swinging. Suddenly, he feels a pain coming from his leg, watching the other goblin bring its club up to swing down on him again. Panicking, Harith yells out, "Get over here and help me!" to the zombies. Thrashing around, Harith starts using his legs to push himself back along the ground, just missing the goblin's second attack. Swinging his arm over his chest that the second goblin is attached to, he bashes it off the ground, trying to get free from the chaos that his fight turned into. Glancing back at the other goblin, he sees as it runs towards him, leaping into the air. Landing on Harith's legs and bringing its club up above its head to swing down onto Harith's, I bring up my hand pointing at the goblin's head. Magic dart. A hole appearing on the goblin's head as it slumps over and falls off Harith's legs, bringing his arm back and sending another punch into the goblin's face that is now trying to bite into his arm. One of the zombies grabs the goblin by the neck and arm, yanking it off of me and onto the ground. Using its free arm, the goblin swings its claws at the zombie's face. Cutting into its flesh, the zombie is unfazed and lunges forward with its jaws open to bite into the now terrified and screaming goblin. Quickly standing up and surveying the battle, Harith sees the zombies teaming up on the last goblin. Moments pass by as the goblin lays still on the ground. Harith quickly points to the entrance of the cave and commands his zombies to enter and kill everything inside. Putting my hand over my heart and just taking a few minutes to steady my breathing, That was intense. I almost got killed. These damn goblins throw all caution to the wind when they're in battle. Quickly glancing over his body, looking for any wounds, thank Merlin. Harith says aloud, "These robes really are amazing. Other than some blunt trauma, I'm fine, but my body hurts like hell. I'm not used to moving like this," hearing a shriek coming from somewhere inside the cave. Okay, I have 0 points left, and the zombies have been in there for a little while now. Taking a deep breath and bending over a little, Harith steps inside the entrance to the goblin's den. After walking for some time, he sees a turn ahead, peeking his head around. It's too dark. I can't see a thing. I'm guessing goblins must have night vision of some kind. Holding up the sword, Harith places a finger on the hilt of the blade and chants light. A small orb of light appears and starts to grow on the side of the sword's hilt. After reaching the size of a quarter, it stops. Just like the flame trick I used to start my fires, this little party trick doesn't require any spell points either. Looking around the corner again, Harith can see that it goes back a dozen or so feet, then opens up into a chamber of some sort, where he can see movement and shrieking. Must be the last of the goblins, taking a couple steps forward and cautiously approaching the room. Harith can see some fur piled onto the floor, along with plants used as some kind of bedding. Laying on the ground is a goblin corpse that looks like it was shredded and started to bleed out. Looking towards the zombies, Harith can see them surrounding one final goblin, bringing it to the ground and watching it struggle in vain. The zombies stand and face Harith, wincing a bit. He looks around the room, seeing no other passages. He orders the zombies to stand guard outside the cave. Obeying their master, they start to shamble outside. Taking a second, Harith raises his sword high above his head and surveys the room. With the adrenaline wearing off, Harith grimaces. It stinks in here bad. Glancing at a corner of the room, I found their bathroom, trying hard to hold down some vomit. Using his foot and kicking the animal fur off to the side, scanning for anything of value. Okay, I figured there would be some kind of treasure, turning around to quickly leave the cave. But I guess that's wishful thinking. They're just goblins. Leaving the cave, Harith looks over the fallen goblins laying about. Too bad I can't fit them in my dimensional storage bag. They're just too big. Looking at his zombies, Harith says, "Grab a corpse and drag it back with us," as Harith walks over and grabs a dead goblin by both ankles and begins walking back to camp, glancing over his shoulder with a slight smile on his face. Good, they can actually follow simple commands, not to mention the extra zombies I'll have at my disposal. Pushing through the bushes and stepping back into camp, Harith looks over and sees his third zombie standing watch, exactly where he left him. Damn zombies, he mutters to himself. Dragging the goblin to the pile, Harith indicates to the other zombies where to put them. That leaves me with 5 corpses and 0 spell points. Maybe I'll wait an extra day to leave. Continuing the next couple of days, it's relatively peaceful, no unwanted guests show up, and Harith manages to catch a few extra fish to take with him as provisions. Also during this time, he finds and whittles a stick to use as a makeshift cork for the vial. It may not hold much, but even just a few sips of water could be the difference between life or death. On the morning of the 3rd day, Harith wakes up, climbing out of his lean-to, and taking in the sights one last time, he mentally commands his zombies to group up on him. As 8 zombies all converge around him, he looks in the opposite direction of the mountain range he left days ago and starts to walk.